In the quiet libraries of Oxford, where dust motes dance through shafts of golden light, there sits a children's book that has captivated generations. Its pages tell the whimsical tale of a young girl who tumbles down a rabbit hole into a world of impossible creatures and nonsensical logic. For over a century and a half, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland has been celebrated as a masterpiece of imagination, a delightful escape into pure fantasy. But what if I told you that beneath the colourful illustrations and playful wordplay, there lurks something far more disturbing? What if the beloved story we thought we knew was actually a carefully constructed facade, hiding truths so dark that they would fundamentally change how you see this classic tale forever? The man who created Alice was not the gentle storyteller history has painted him to be. The real story behind Wonderland is one of obsession, scandal and allegations so serious that they have been whispered about in academic circles for nearly a century. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on the most controversial literary figure of the Victorian era and examine the evidence that has been hidden from public view for far too long. This is not just another video about a famous book. This is an investigation into one of literature's most carefully guarded secrets. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why scholars have fought to suppress certain facts about Lewis Carroll, why mysterious pages were torn from his personal diary, and why a photograph discovered in a French museum sent shockwaves through the academic world. But to understand the darkness that may have inspired Wonderland, we must first understand the man who created it. We must venture into the shadowy world of Victorian Oxford, where brilliant minds lived double lives, and where the line between genius and madness was often dangerously thin. Charles Dodgson was a contradiction wrapped in an enigma. By day, he was a respected mathematics lecturer at Christ Church College, Oxford, known for his precise logical mind and his work in symbolic logic. He was a conservative mathematician who railed against the new abstract mathematical concepts that were revolutionizing his field. To his colleagues, he appeared to be the very model of Victorian propriety, a bachelor don devoted to his academic pursuits. But there was another side to Charles Dodgson, a side that emerged when he adopted the pen name Lewis Carroll. This other self was drawn to the company of children, particularly young girls, in ways that even by Victorian standards raised eyebrows among his contemporaries. He would invite children to his rooms for tea, take them on outings without adult supervision, and most controversially, photograph them in poses that would be considered deeply inappropriate by today's standards. In the rigid social structure of Victorian England, unmarried men who showed excessive interest in children were viewed with suspicion. Yet Dodgson seemed to actively seek out the company of young girls, developing what he called child friendships that lasted for years. He would shower them with gifts, write them elaborate letters, and create fantastical stories designed specifically to entertain them. It was on one such outing, a golden afternoon boat trip on July 4th, 1862, that the story of Alice was born. Dodgson was accompanying the three little sisters, Alice, Lorena, and Edith, along the Thames River near Oxford. To entertain them during the journey, he began weaving an impromptu tale about a girl who fell down a rabbit hole into a strange underground world. 10-year-old Alice Liddell was so enchanted by the story that she begged Dodgson to write it down for her. He obliged, eventually presenting her with a handwritten manuscript entitled Alice's Adventures Underground in November 1864. The expanded version was published as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland the following year, launching one of the most successful children's books in literary history. But the relationship between Dodgson and the Liddell family was not destined to last. In June 1863, something happened that caused an abrupt and permanent rift between the mathematician and the family that had inspired his greatest work. The nature of this falling out has remained one of literature's most persistent mysteries, made all the more intriguing by what we know was deliberately concealed. Years after Dodgson's death, when scholars gained access to his personal papers, they discovered that crucial pages had been torn from his diary. These missing pages corresponded exactly to the period when his relationship with the Liddell family came to its sudden and mysterious end. Even more suspiciously, Dodgson's nephew later admitted that certain diary entries had been deliberately destroyed by the family to protect the author's reputation. What could have been so damaging that it required such drastic measures? The surviving evidence points to a scandal that rocked the respectable Victorian household of Dean Liddell. Some scholars believe that Dodgson had developed inappropriate feelings for one of the Liddell daughters, though they disagree about which one. The traditional view suggests it was Alice herself, then just 11 years old. but newer evidence points to a different and equally disturbing possibility. Recent research has uncovered documents suggesting that the real cause of the break was gossip about Dodgson's relationship with the family's governess, or with Lorena, Alice's older sister. This revelation takes on a particularly sinister dimension when we consider a controversial photograph that would later surface in a French museum, a photograph that would send shockwaves through the Carroll scholarly community. The image, allegedly taken by Dodgson himself, shows what appears to be a pubescent girl in a full frontal nude pose. The photograph bears an inscription identifying the subject as Lorena Liddell, Alice's elder sister. It was described by one expert as an image no parent would ever have consented to. The implications were staggering. If authentic, this photograph would represent concrete evidence of behaviour that crossed every boundary of Victorian propriety and would explain why the Liddell family cut all ties with Dodgson so abruptly. However, the photograph's authenticity has been fiercely disputed. In 1993, Carroll expert Edward Wakeling examined the image and declared it to be not of Lorena Liddell after repeated comparison to other confirmed photographs. Picture conservationist Nicholas Burnett suggested that the inscription might be a dealer's notation, rather than Carroll's own identification of the subject. Yet the controversy surrounding this single photograph reveals something deeper about the suspicions that have long surrounded Lewis Carroll. These allegations did not emerge from nowhere. They have been whispered about in academic circles since the 1930s, when literary critics began applying Freudian analysis to both Carroll's work and his biography. The charges against Carroll are serious and persistent. They suggest that the man who created one of childhood's most beloved stories was himself a predator who used his literary talents and social position to gain access to vulnerable children. The allegations paint a picture of a man who lived a carefully constructed double life, presenting himself as a respectable academic, while harbouring darker impulses that he may have acted upon. But these accusations raise troubling questions about evidence, motivation, and the nature of historical truth itself. How do we separate fact from speculation when dealing with a figure from over a century ago? How do we interpret Victorian social norms through a modern lens? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when our desire to protect beloved cultural artefacts conflicts with the pursuit of uncomfortable truths? The answers to these questions will determine not just how we view Lewis Carroll, but how we understand the very nature of the world he created. For if the allegations are true, then Wonderland itself becomes something far more sinister than a simple children's fantasy. The evidence against Carroll extends far beyond a single questionable photograph or missing diary pages. When we examine the full scope of his interactions with children, a disturbing pattern begins to emerge. Carroll was not content to simply befriend one or two children in his social circle. Instead, he actively cultivated relationships with dozens of young girls over the course of his adult life, meticulously documenting these friendships in letters that reveal an almost obsessive attention to detail. His correspondence with these children is extensive and troubling. He would write to them regularly, sometimes daily, keeping track of their birthdays, their interests, their family situations. He developed elaborate games and puzzles specifically designed to maintain their attention and ensure their continued correspondence. Most unsettling of all, he would often express disappointment when his young friends grew older, lamenting that they were no longer the charming children they once were. This pattern of behaviour was not lost on his Victorian contemporaries. Several parents eventually restricted their children's contact with Carroll, though they rarely explained their reasons publicly. The social conventions of the time prevented open discussion of such suspicions, but the whispers persisted in Oxford's tight-knit academic community. Carroll's photography hobby provides another deeply troubling dimension to these allegations. During the Victorian era, photography was still a relatively new and expensive pursuit, requiring significant technical knowledge and equipment. Carroll threw himself into this hobby with characteristic obsession, but his choice of subjects was highly unusual for a bachelor mathematics professor. While most Victorian photographers focused on landscapes, architecture, or formal portraits of adults, Carroll's camera was almost exclusively trained on children. He photographed hundreds of children over the course of his career, many of them in states of undress that were considered artistic, but would be deemed entirely inappropriate today. Some of these photographs show children in poses that seem calculated to emphasize their vulnerability and innocence, in ways that make modern viewers deeply uncomfortable. The technical aspects of Victorian photography also raise disturbing questions about Carroll's methods. The long exposure times required by the cameras of his era meant that subjects had to remain perfectly still for several minutes. For young children, this would have required careful coaching and repeated attempts. The intimate private setting necessary for such photography sessions would have provided ample opportunity for inappropriate behaviour. What makes these photographic sessions even more suspicious is Carroll's documented preference for photographing children alone, without their parents or guardians present. He would often invite children to his rooms at Christ Church College for private photography sessions, a practice that raised eyebrows even among his more liberal colleagues. The fact that parents allowed such arrangements suggests either extraordinary trust in Carroll's character or a troubling naivety about the potential for abuse. The content of Alice in Wonderland itself has also come under scrutiny from scholars looking for evidence of Carroll's alleged predilections. When examined through the lens of modern psychology, certain elements of the story take on disturbing new meanings. Alice's frequent changes in size, her vulnerability in a world controlled by irrational adults, and her encounters with characters who seem to delight in confusing and frightening are all echo patterns commonly found in accounts of childhood trauma. The story's obsession with Alice's physical transformation is particularly troubling when considered alongside allegations about Carroll's behaviour. Alice grows and shrinks repeatedly throughout her journey, often in ways that leave her feeling helpless and exposed. She struggles to control her own body, a theme that resonates uncomfortably with what we now know about the psychological impact of childhood sexual abuse. Even more disturbing is the way authority figures in Wonderland treat Alice. The adults she encounters are universally cruel, arbitrary and threatening. They subject her to nonsensical rules, impossible demands, and psychological torture disguised as games. The famous trial scene at the end of the book, where Alice faces a kangaroo court determined to find her guilty, regardless of evidence, reads like a child's nightmare about being powerless against adult authority. Some scholars have suggested that these themes reflect Carroll's own troubled relationship with authority, and his possible feelings of guilt about his behaviour toward children. The chaotic, threatening world of Wonderland could be seen as a projection of his own psychological state, a place where normal moral boundaries dissolve and innocent children are subjected to the whims of disturbed adults. The timing of Carroll's literary output also supports these darker interpretations. His most creative and successful period coincided exactly with his most active period of cultivating friendships with young children. As these friendships became more difficult to maintain due to growing social suspicion, his creative output declined dramatically. This correlation suggests a troubling connection between his literary inspiration and his alleged inappropriate relationships. The academic community's response to these allegations has been telling in its defensiveness. Carroll scholars have gone to extraordinary lengths to discredit or suppress evidence that might support the charges against their subject. They have questioned the authenticity of photographs, dismissed witness accounts, and attacked the credibility of researchers who have raised uncomfortable questions about Carroll's behaviour. This defensive posture becomes even more suspicious when we consider the financial incentives involved. The Alice books generate millions of dollars in revenue every year for publishers, estates, and academic institutions. The Christ Church College, where Carroll taught, has built a significant portion of its tourist appeal around its connection to the Alice stories. Any revelation that would fundamentally damage the reputation of these beloved books would have serious economic consequences for many people and institutions. But the most disturbing aspect of the Carroll case may be how it connects to broader patterns of institutional cover-up that we now recognise as common in cases of child abuse. The missing diary pages, the destroyed correspondence, the coordinated efforts to suppress uncomfortable evidence, all follow patterns that have become depressingly familiar in cases involving powerful figures accused of harming children. The Carroll case also reveals how cultural investment in certain narratives can blind us to uncomfortable truths. Our collective desire to preserve the innocence and magic of childhood stories makes us reluctant to examine evidence that might shatter these cherished illusions. We want to believe that the creators of our most beloved children's literature were themselves pure and innocent, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. This willful blindness extends beyond the academic community to popular culture itself. Despite decades of whispered allegations and mounting evidence, the Carroll case has rarely received serious mainstream attention. Publishers continue to market Alice books without any mention of the controversies surrounding their creator. Parents read these stories to their children without any awareness of the dark questions that surround their origins. The implications of this cultural amnesia extend far beyond a single Victorian author and his books. They reveal how easily we can ignore uncomfortable truths when they threaten narratives we want to preserve, and how institutional power can be used to suppress evidence and silence critics. The Carroll case serves as a disturbing reminder that the stories we tell ourselves about the past are often carefully constructed to avoid confronting realities that would force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew. As we dig deeper into this web of allegations and cover-ups, we encounter an even more disturbing dimension to the Carroll story, one that connects his Victorian world to the darkest corners of our modern digital age. In 1998, British authorities uncovered what they called the largest international child exploitation ring ever discovered at that time. The organisation had a name that sent chills through investigators who understood its literary significance. They called themselves the Wonderland Club. The Wonderland Club was not some casual gathering of criminals. It was a sophisticated, highly organised network that spanned continents and required its members to possess at least 10,000 images of exploited children before they could even join. The group used advanced encryption technology and maintained strict anonymity protocols that would have impressed intelligence agencies. When authorities finally penetrated their defences, they discovered over 750,000 images in the club's digital archives. The choice of name was not coincidental. Detective Alex Wood, who led the investigation, revealed that the club's founder, a man named Harry Mudd, had deliberately chosen the Wonderland theme as a coded reference that would be understood by other predators while appearing innocent to casual observers. The Alice stories had become a kind of secret language, a way for those with the darkest intentions to identify each other while hiding in plain sight. This modern connection to Carroll's work is more than just symbolic. It reveals how the themes and imagery of Alice in Wonderland have been appropriated by those who see in Carroll's relationship with children a validation of their own twisted desires. The story of a vulnerable girl entering a strange world controlled by unpredictable adults has become, in their hands, something far more sinister than Carroll ever explicitly wrote. But the modern exploitation of Alice imagery goes beyond criminal organisations. Throughout the internet, there exists a disturbing subculture of websites and forums that share what they call artistic nude photography of children, often including works attributed to Lewis Carroll himself. These sites operate in legal grey areas, claiming artistic merit while catering to audiences with clearly exploitative interests. They use Carroll's reputation as a respected Victorian gentleman and accomplished photographer to legitimise collections that would otherwise be immediately recognised as inappropriate. The existence of this modern exploitation network raises profound questions about the legacy of Carroll's work and the responsibility of scholars and institutions to address uncomfortable truths. When beloved cultural artefacts become tools for harm, at what point does protecting their reputation become complicity in ongoing damage? The academic establishment's response to these modern developments has been largely one of denial and deflection. Carroll scholars argue that the criminal appropriation of Alice imagery has nothing to do with the original author's intentions or behaviour. They insist that the coincidental use of Wonderland themes by modern predators proves nothing about Carroll himself and should not influence scholarly assessment of his character. Yet this defensive posture ignores the troubling possibility that modern criminals might have recognised something in Carroll's work that scholars have been reluctant to acknowledge. The fact that predators have consistently found inspiration and validation in Alice in Wonderland suggests that there may be elements in the text that speak to their particular psychology in ways that innocent readers never notice. When we examine the mathematical and logical puzzles that fill Carroll's work, another disturbing pattern emerges. Carroll was obsessed with games, riddles, and logical paradoxes that had no solutions. His famous riddle about why a raven is like a writing desk was deliberately constructed to have no answer, creating a puzzle that would frustrate and confuse anyone who attempted to solve it. This pattern of creating unsolvable problems mirrors the psychological manipulation tactics commonly used by those who exploit children. The mathematical conservatism that defined Carroll's academic career also takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. His fierce resistance to abstract mathematical concepts and his insistence on concrete, tangible solutions to problems may have reflected a mind that was uncomfortable with ambiguity in all its forms. This need for absolute control and clear hierarchies could have extended from his academic work into his personal relationships, particularly those with vulnerable children who represented the ultimate in controllable subjects. Carroll's contemporaries in Victorian Oxford were operating within a social system that made accusations against respected figures almost impossible to voice publicly. The rigid class structure and the unquestioned authority of university professors created an environment where abuse could flourish unchecked. Children from middle-class families were taught to respect and obey academic figures without question, making them perfect targets for exploitation. The Victorian era's obsession with childhood innocence also created a cultural blind spot that predators could exploit. The idealization of children as pure, angelic beings made it almost impossible for adults to conceive that these same children could be victims of sexual exploitation. This cultural naivety provided perfect cover for those who wished to harm children while maintaining public respectability. Carroll's position within this system was particularly advantageous for someone with predatory inclinations. As a mathematics lecturer at one of England's most prestigious universities, he commanded automatic respect and trust from parents who saw association with Oxford as a mark of honour for their children. His bachelor status, while unusual, was not uncommon among academic figures and did not automatically raise suspicions about his motivations. The photography hobby that Carroll pursued so enthusiastically also provided him with a socially acceptable reason to spend long periods alone with children. Victorian society was fascinated with the new art of photography, and parents were often eager to have their children photographed by someone with Carroll's reputation and skill. The technical requirements of the medium gave him a perfect excuse for extended private sessions with his young subjects. The surviving photographic work attributed to Carroll reveals an artist who was particularly skilled at capturing what he called the natural unself-conscious beauty of childhood. But modern viewers often find these images deeply unsettling in ways that go beyond simple changes in social conventions. There is something in the poses, the lighting, and the expressions he captured that suggests a photographer who was perhaps too interested in his subject's vulnerability and innocence. The destruction of Carroll's diary pages becomes even more significant when we consider that these photographs survived, while written evidence of his thoughts and activities during the crucial period was deliberately eliminated. This suggests that whoever made the decision about what to preserve and what to destroy understood that visual evidence might be dismissed as artistic expression, while written confessions or descriptions of inappropriate behaviour could not be explained away. The pattern of evidence destruction extends beyond Carroll's immediate family to the broader institutional response to allegations against him. Oxford University has consistently refused to open its archives to researchers investigating these claims, citing privacy concerns and the need to protect Carroll's reputation. This institutional stonewalling has prevented independent verification of many key facts about Carroll's life and relationships. The economic interests surrounding the Alice brand have only grown stronger over time, creating ever more powerful incentives to suppress evidence that might damage the story's commercial value. The books generate revenue not just for publishers, but for theme parks, movie studios, merchandise companies, and tourist destinations around the world. The financial stakes involved in maintaining Alice's innocent reputation now reach into the billions of dollars annually. This commercial investment in Carroll's innocence has created a feedback loop that makes honest historical investigation almost impossible. Scholars who raise uncomfortable questions about Carroll's behaviour find their research funding cut, their publications rejected, and their academic careers threatened. The message is clear. Certain questions are not welcome, regardless of the evidence that might support them. The Carroll case reveals how powerful interests can shape historical narrative to serve their own purposes, even when that narrative may conceal serious crimes against children. It demonstrates how cultural investment in certain stories can blind us to evidence that contradicts those stories, and how institutional power can be used to silence critics and suppress uncomfortable truths. As we continue to uncover new evidence about Carroll's life and behaviour, we must confront the possibility that one of our most beloved children's stories may have emerged from the darkest possible circumstances. The implications of this possibility extend far beyond literary scholarship into questions about how we protect children, how we construct cultural narratives, and how we balance the preservation of beloved stories against the pursuit of truth. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this investigation is how it reveals the mechanisms by which uncomfortable truths can be systematically erased from history. The Carroll case is not unique in its pattern of evidence destruction, institutional cover-up, and economic pressure to maintain a sanitized narrative. It is part of a broader phenomenon that we see repeated throughout history, whenever powerful figures or beloved institutions are accused of harming children. The process always follows the same predictable steps. First, the immediate circle around the accused closes ranks, claiming that allegations are unfounded or malicious. Evidence that might support the accusations mysteriously disappears or is declared unreliable. Academic and institutional authorities launch coordinated campaigns to discredit accusers and suppress uncomfortable research. Finally, economic interests mobilize to ensure that damaging information never reaches mainstream awareness. What makes the Carroll case particularly instructive is how this process has played out across multiple generations of scholars. Each wave of researchers who have attempted to investigate these allegations has faced increasingly sophisticated forms of resistance. Early investigators in the 1930s were simply dismissed as sensation seekers, applying inappropriate Freudian theories to innocent Victorian relationships. Later researchers found their access to archives restricted and their funding mysteriously withdrawn. Modern scholars face legal threats and coordinated attacks on their professional credibility. The most effective weapon in this campaign of suppression has been the weaponization of Carroll's literary reputation itself. Critics of the allegations are regularly accused of trying to destroy childhood innocence and ruin beloved stories for selfish academic purposes. This emotional manipulation makes it extremely difficult for researchers to pursue legitimate questions about Carroll's behavior without appearing to attack something that millions of people hold dear. The psychological impact of this suppression extends beyond the academic community to society as a whole. When we refuse to confront evidence of abuse by respected figures, we send a dangerous message about whose safety matters and whose reputation is more important than truth. We teach children that their experiences of harm are less valuable than adult comfort and institutional stability. The Carroll case also demonstrates how predators can use cultural reverence for their work as a shield against accountability. The more beloved and important their creations become, the more protected they are from serious investigation. This creates a perverse incentive structure where those who exploit children while creating culturally significant work become essentially untouchable. The modern digital age has only amplified these dynamics. The global reach of Alice imagery and the massive commercial interests surrounding the stories have created an international network of stakeholders invested in maintaining Carroll's innocent reputation. Any serious challenge to the official narrative now faces not just local academic resistance, but coordinated international pressure from entertainment conglomerates, publishing houses, and government tourism agencies. Yet despite this formidable opposition, new evidence continues to emerge. Digital analysis of Carroll's photographs has revealed disturbing details that were invisible to earlier investigators. Previously unknown letters and documents occasionally surface from private collections, often containing information that contradicts official accounts of Carroll's relationships with children. Most significantly, modern understanding of predatory behavior patterns allows us to recognize warning signs in Carroll's documented actions that earlier generations of scholars were not equipped to identify. The accumulation of this evidence creates an increasingly uncomfortable picture that becomes harder to dismiss with each new revelation. The missing diary pages, the abrupt end of the Liddell friendship, the suspicious photography sessions, the pattern of cultivating relationships with vulnerable children, and the institutional efforts to suppress investigation all point toward conclusions that defenders of Carroll's reputation are increasingly unable to explain away. The truth about Lewis Carroll may never be fully known. The missing diary pages, the destroyed evidence, and the decades of institutional cover-up have ensured that the darkest secrets of Wonderland remain buried in the shadows of Victorian Oxford. But perhaps that is exactly the point. Perhaps the real horror is not what Carroll may have done, but how easily we have allowed uncomfortable truths to disappear when they threaten the stories we want to believe. The next time you see a child reading Alice in Wonderland, ask yourself this question: are we protecting innocence, or are we protecting something far more dangerous?